So today is the 30th anniversary of the Springboks win on June 24, 1995, the Great Rugby World Cup victory, where they won the Webb Ellis Trophy by beating New Zealand and stopping Joe Nalomu. It's a moment that was told over and over in several documentaries, and of course played a huge part in South Africa's history. You'll see I also uploaded a chat a bit earlier with Andrew Mertens and Joel Stransky about the final, that epic final that took place on today. But I thought while we're doing this, I might as well just add this video as well, because one of the momentous things in the World Cup campaign was the Battle of Boet Erasmus, South Africa's pool game against Canada, which was supposed to be an innocuous game. South Africa was supposed to win it quite easily, but it ended up being a game that almost cost them the World Cup, because the World Cup had a rule that if it ended up after full time and extra time scores even, then the team with the least amount of cards would have won the World Cup. And New Zealand didn't concede any cards in that World Cup then. Of course, cards were a lot rarer at that time. But South Africa had this game against Canada where 2 red cards were issued for a massive brawl that broke out, the Battle of Boet Erasmus. Canada had Christian Stewart sent off, the Stormers and Western Province centre who played for them. And South Africa had James Dalton and Peter Hendricks sent off for the fight as well. And it almost cost South Africa later on. But it was a night that few of us who were around in 95 will ever forget. And so what we did is my colleague Gavin Rich and I, at the time during COVID 5 years ago, the 25th anniversary of this, we got some of the guys together. We got Hennie, who played centre for the Springboks in 95. And we got Christian Stewart, who was of course famously sent off in that game, to remember the game and chat a bit about their memories. It's just a good banter chat, so have a watch and enjoy. And if you haven't already, please press the subscribe button. Chat to you soon. Cheers. Welcome, guys. We're talking 1995, the famous Battle of Boet Erasmus, the Canada-South Africa game. 25 years on, we're lucky enough to have 2 of the players here with Gavin and I tonight. We've got Hennie Roux, who was on the bench and part of that 95 World Cup winning team, and Christian Stewart, who played for Canada that night. So welcome, guys.
Thanks, Brendan. Nice to be here.
I think let's start with Hennie. Sorry, but... let's start with Hennie. Hennie, I mean, you guys came into that game off the back of that game against Australia, the euphoria of beating Australia, and then maybe a bit of a dip against Romania and that. But just maybe take us through, what was the feelings in the camp coming through into that game against Canada?
Yeah, I think to a large degree, we weren't very happy with the result against Romania. There was no real continuity in the game. There was no flow. So I think everyone expected a lot more. Romania did make it difficult for us. They went in full-out defense mode, but we also didn't, really do what we were meant to do, and that's just control the game up front and get ball on the front foot. It was more of a chommel, as they call it, and it kind of grinded on, and we never really got anything going. So it was a frustrating game all in all, and we needed to get back to game plan against Canada.
If I remember right, though, there was a bit of niggle in the lead up to that. There was a couple of words said in sort of media conferences and that. Did you guys pick up on that coming into the game?
You're talking about prior to the Canada game?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, there wasn't really too much, that we as players, felt. Canada was always a very physical type of side, and it was again one of those aspects of trying to dominate with structure and plan and pattern play more than letting it kind of unravel. Because they were very committed as a side, but collectively, I think just because of years of playing, if we stuck to structure and pattern and plan, the odds were that we should have possibly beaten them. Christian might disagree, but yeah, that's
not at all. Fully in agreement.
Well,
there was a game.
I was going to say that's
it was a game that South Africa just needed to get through, get the W, and move on. For the Canadians, it was one of the great days in their sporting careers to have the opportunity to play against South Africa in South Africa.
So for you guys, it was almost like you're going into a final. I mean, in the sense that there was no tomorrow. I mean, it was like
absolutely.
You didn't have to worry about being injured where the Boks did, because we've seen a couple of World Cup games since then. Myself and Brendan were in I think it was North Auckland in 2011 when the Boks played against Samoa, and it was a similar scenario. And you can imagine playing Samoa when they've got absolutely nothing to lose, and for them it's the final, and the Boks obviously were looking forward to a quarterfinal against Australia. And it is one of the problems of the World Cup, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that right at the end of the pool phase, you have teams playing against each other that don't have the same thing that they're playing for, if you know what I'm saying.
No, 100%. Yeah, no, that was very much the case. So, I will say this, that in the lead up to the game, I wasn't aware of any press, that there was any niggle in the media. But, as teams do, they study other teams and they watch the videos of the previous performances. And the only thing that I can say going into that game was that Canada were very aware that South Africa was a very physical side. And sometimes, physical sides, and historically South Africa have, pushed the boundary as all physical teams do. And I think there was just a kind of general feeling that, we're not going to allow ourselves to be bullied. And that was, but there was nothing more to it than that. And I think what happened on the night was just, it was just kind of a random event for some reason. Maybe it was because the lights had gone out and, there was something in the air that night, but there was certainly no intent or no intention from Canada's side to get involved in what eventually took place.
You nearly never played for Canada that night. You nearly actually played for the Springboks. I know I read somewhere last year, or I heard somewhere last year, you said that Kitch had actually intended to field you alongside Hennie. Hennie was going to play flower half. You were going to play number 12 in that game about a month before the World Cup at Ellis Park against Samoa. Am I right in saying that?
Gavin, so Hennie might not even be aware of this. So in that game, I was informed by Edward Griffiths that I'd been selected at 12 and Hennie was at 10 and Yapi was at 13. And as was done in those days, and I don't know how it's done today, the team would go to the IRB and the IRB would have to sanction the side. And Edward Griffiths phoned me a day later to say, you've been banned for 3 years. So I had no intention of playing for Canada in the 95 World Cup. I'd played for Italy. I'd played in Italy for Rovigo the season before, that December, January. I came back in about January.
With AJ
and
Fenton.
Canada had come on tour to Europe and had got hold of me and said, just hop on the tour. And, interestingly, they had introduced a ban that year, or the law that year, that you stood down for 3 years if you played for another country. And it was intended to stop the Islanders from playing New Zealand. So nobody was aware that there was this 3-year ban in place.
Hennie, did you know about that, Hennie?
No, I didn't. I didn't, frankly. But yeah, these rules get made to, favour and please the powers that be. So no, I wasn't aware of that, but it could very well be.
Hennie, do you remember the build up to the one thing I do remember, and Christian, you can also comment as well. The one thing I do remember, because I was in PE that week, was that, and I mean, you're an Eastern Cape guy yourself, is that if I remember correctly, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys were based in PE the whole tournament, well, the whole time that you were there. And
Yes.
the PE people sort of, like they do, sort of adopted you as their own. And it was almost like a bit of a sort of almost like a derby. There was, I remember the Eastern Province Herald was huge about Canada because you'd been there the whole time, and it was almost like you got went into the game as the sort of like the home team.
Yeah, I think we'd been good for business. We kept the pubs full, and I think you're probably right. There was an element that we were their kind of home team.
Do you remember that aspect, Hennie? I mean, you guys weren't there the whole time, so you wouldn't know. Maybe you arrived. What the Romanian game was only about 4 days before, so you were only in PE for about 3 days, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I can't say I really picked up on that, but other than knowing that Canada, was based there, it wasn't something that really came to the fore while we were there.
Either of you, I mean, let's start with Hennie, mate. Coming into when the game started, we had the delay, the load shedding, which we didn't call load shedding back then, but the floodlights that failed in 45 minutes of darkness. Maybe both of you just chat about the feelings in the change room going into that. It turned out to be the first of not the first delay for the Springboks in that tournament with the semi-final one as well. But just maybe Hennie, first from you, just what was it like in that change room with the 45 minutes, not knowing if you're going to play, and then Christian, you coming in there.
Yeah, Brendan, it is a little difficult because you try and build yourself up to the time that you go out, and there's two aspects to it. Obviously, there's the mental preparation, and then there's a physical preparation of warming up and getting to the point where you warm enough to go on, and you've stretched every muscle and so forth. So it is a little bit disrupting in terms of your normal cycle and of your normal process. But so to get logged back another 45 minutes and then be uncertain whether it's going to happen or not and where the problem lies, and it was a little bit unnerving, and for us, we also used to playing during the day mostly, so it wasn't an ideal start for us at all.
Christian, you guys?
From the
Canadian.
Canadian.
I'd agree with Hennie. I mean, it must have been bloody painful. I mean, they just wanted to, as I said earlier, to get the win under their belt and move on as quickly as possible. And it was strange that night. I remember, interestingly enough, that I had a big night. In those days, it was very amateur, the game. I think we conducted ourselves differently. I don't know, maybe things have changed. And I remember going out and bumping into David Campese and Jason Little. And I ended up having drinks with them all night, only to realize that they'd been rested for the coming days. And I remember thinking to myself and joking afterwards that that extra 40 minutes had allowed me a little bit more recovery time. So it definitely galvanized the Canadians, funnily enough, when the lights went off. I think when we first went out, I seemed to think that the Canadians were so nervous and overawed by playing South Africa in South Africa that, this opportunity to come back in to the change room, and it was unique and it was different. And I think it galvanized the guys. And there was something, that as I said, there was something in the air. It certainly, I think, played into our hands, and definitely didn't play into the South African hands. I think, I think from the game plan, I think it was quite obvious that you guys wanted to keep it tight. I mean, you were obviously so dominant in the scrums, and we were, going to try and move the ball around and try anything. And you were always going to, the result was never in doubt. And South Africa just had to stick to the basics and put points on the board and get through the game.
Any Kitchen that game? Remember, I can't remember whether the gold team was the first choice team or the green team was the first choice team. But he had that twin team policy, and when he went into that game, I was always a bit concerned. I know he chose Francois as the captain, but like his mixing and matching against Romania was okay. But Canada were a much stronger team in those days than they are now. I mean, I think Canadian rugby's regressed quite a bit since those days. And I remember being quite concerned because if you'd lost that game, I mean, it wasn't really realistic, but Christian will probably vouch for the fact that in the 1991 World Cup, Canada actually did quite well. And I think they pushed some of the big teams quite well. I mean, you played in that World Cup, didn't you, Chris?
We made the quarterfinal. We lost something.
Yeah, we played the quarterfinal. Exactly. So you'd gone quite a long way. So you'd gone quite a long way in the previous World Cup. I was very nervous. Were you guys sort of fully on board with the whole sort of team selection that night, and that like we're going to go in there with, it wasn't a second string team because Francois was leading it, but it was largely a sort of mix and match team. I mean, you were on the bench.
It was. I think it was very much a rotational policy that he did want to follow. He did want to give the guys a bit of a break, and that was the game to do it. If they played in the initial two games, you were either benched or not playing. I'm not sure. I don't think Francois played against Romania. So
Richter captained you then, yeah.
Yeah, and so everyone kind of had their break as part of the process, and that was possibly showing that he did view Canada as a bit of a threat, and that Francois' presence as captain was required in that particular game. So I mean that would warrant that, but the rest of the selection was a bit of a changeover. There were definitely some let's call it guys rested and other parties put in their place.
But that would have added to the tension because, as Chris says, everybody expected you to win. You're expected to go through to the quarterfinals, and yet being the favourites in a game like that sometimes is not the greatest position to be in.
No, it's not, and you also kind of develop momentum with the players around you, and when you start changing the team with 4, 5, 6, 7 players, there's just some aspect which goes missing, and I think in that environment we kind of had that, and Canada came out with a very physical approach, so it does kind of disrupt the momentum and the unity within the team because you're kind of uncertain. You're used to other people next to you, how they run, what lines they are, where to expect them, what the communication is. So there's nothing like playing together to formulate and get that cohesiveness. And I think to some degree that was missing. And I think, Canada further exploited that by coming onto the field with a real physical approach and, had us on the back foot for quite some time.
Yeah, I was going to say, Hennie, I mean, if I remember from the game, there was a number of sort of off-the-ball incidents, little pushes after a tackle, and I remember one with I think it was the 8th man of Canada who sort of put his elbow into Jurst's face across the touchline there, and Jurst turned around and said to him, "Do you want to come?" And he was egging him on. So it was building up like that. I mean, you were sitting on the sideline at that stage, and then obviously later on came on. You guys had built up a 20-0 lead by then. Did you guys sense that it might break loose? I mean, at any point?
Yeah, look, I mean, sitting on the stand, I particularly knew of at least 2 or 3 incidents where there was big niggle, late tackles, kind of off the ball incidences and so forth. Watching from the stand, it was a little bit frustrating because it kind of became a little bit evident that they were there to really show a physical presence, and focusing on the ball was sometimes not the priority, and that did come through to me sitting on the grandstand. And when eventually I got pulled on the field, I was already kind of a little bit frustrated by some of the incidences that happen on the field. Yeah.
And Christian, I mean, you guys, it was obviously rattling the box there. I mean, it was working for you guys at that point. And how did you see it? Did you see it was going to spill over at any point?
No, I mean, the game was over. I mean, they would when the big incident happened, the big fight, and yeah, there was no, as I said earlier, there was no intent to go out, but it was a big night for the Canadians. It was a great opportunity for them to show themselves as great rugby players, number one, and maybe they also wanted to show themselves as hard men, So, and they are hard guys. Remember that most of them come out of ice hockey, where fighting is actually part of the sport. So Rod Snow, for example, was a goon. So the goon in ice hockey is the guy that they send on to fight. And when the two goons fight against each other, the refs leave them, the teams part, and it's actually part of the sport of ice hockey. So I suppose there's that mentality that exists within any Canadian rugby player. So, but no, again, to reiterate, I mean, there was no intent.
Planned intent, possibly.
There was no planned intent. No. Yeah.
No,
just watching the incident again earlier on, and at the time when I was there, I remember wondering why it was Bullet that was singled out, and having watched it again tonight, I thought of it again, and I wasn't necessarily James Dalton's biggest fan back then, but I remember thinking at the time, why him? You guys were on the field. I mean, I just felt, okay, I mean, there were two Canadians sent off as well, but to me it looked as if like they were sort of the instigators. I mean, why was it Bullet? I mean, what did you guys feel when out on the field?
Can I jump in first?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, well, I don't know when the rule changed, but the rule at some stage changed to the third man who entered the fray. He was the chap that was penalized, and that was a brilliant ruling. And I don't think that ruling was around. And the third guy in this instance was so obviously Scott Stewart. So Peter Hendricks and our wing, Winston Stanley. Sorry, that's my rule.
Stanley, yeah.
That had a little bit of argy-bargy, and it was about to end. And Scott Stewart came in, A, from behind, B, high, and put his elbow into the back of Peter Hendricks. I mean, that was insanity. Now, Scotty Stewart's a lovely guy, fantastic chap. I think he's coaching somewhere in America now. I think he was at UCLA last, but a lovely chap, but just did something absolutely crazy. And he was the chap that should have been sent off. There's no question about it. I watched it again earlier as well. And James Dalton then came in. He was the fourth man in.
Fourth man, okay. Was there ever any sanction? Sorry, I'm going to let Hennie talk now. But was there ever any sanction against Scott Stewart? I can't remember. I know Peter Hendricks was sanctioned. After,
and quite frankly, the World Cup was over.
Yeah.
For Canada. So if there was a sanction, he might have missed out on 2 club games. Back in Canada.
I was going to jump in here because, I mean, Hennie, I saw you throw probably the only punch I saw you throw in your career in that game as well. You had 1 or 2 little right hooks there.
Yeah, look, it's just totally out of character. And as you said, there was 1 or 2 incidents that had me a little bit rivaled up. I just collected an injury against Northern Transvaal late in the 80s, completely off the ball type of incident, which it's caused me quite a lot of pain, and I still have that pain. And so things off the ball, totally unnecessary, is always something that gets my guile going a little bit. And it was just one of those things, it was, the intent was clear. There was the raffle had kind of calmed down to some degree. And all of a sudden, there was a very obvious want to try and come in at pace and get involved. And they were kind of beeline right past me. And I think the fullback walked into a little left of mine, which I'm not too proud of.
Is it a good punch?
It was a left, Christian, so I'm not proud of it.
You had a better right, if I recall. Yeah, just by the way, you know where I was during that fight? I was back in the middle of the field chatting to Brendan Fenter, and our conversation while the fight was going on was about what we were going to do after the World Cup. You know, I was saying like, yeah, so what are your plans? You know, kind of making conversation. It was a bit awkward. They're actually killing each other 15 meters away. But yeah, so I wasn't involved. I wasn't much of a fighter.
For me, that night was a very long one because the journalists had to sit at the old Boet Erasmus until about 1 a.m, maybe it was 2 a.m, waiting for Edward Griffiths to come back with the sort of news on what was going to happen, whether there was going to be a sanction and when it was going to happen. What was it like for you guys? Because you guys must have gone straight back to the hotel like you normally do. Was there a feeling that James was a bit unlucky as well? And I mean, obviously, Peter then got sanctioned later in the tournament. Was there sort of a feeling that there could actually be more of a sort of repercussion from that game than there is for a normal game? I'm remembering, of course, that it's the World Cup and that you guys had a quarterfinal still to play.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm still kind of struggling, and I understand, you know, if you're the third, fourth, fifth person and you come in with intent when you've completely not been involved, and that was the incident really when the fullback, you know, came in. He wasn't involved. He came from right 20 meters back and wanted to throw a haymaker and came past me. He was, you know, aligning someone else up, and he was next to me, and I wasn't going to kind of allow it to happen. And the rest was just adrenaline. So, but you know, from that perspective, you know, James really, if you go and look at what he did, I think he got the rawest deal out of everyone, and he was really unlucky because in normal coast of things, you know, he would hardly have got a yellow card. So yeah, I think it was really, really tough and hard on him, and I know that it hit him quite hard after that as well. There was definitely a feeling of a level of unfairness in terms of how how that was meted out, yeah, so that wasn't great at all.
Chris, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and I would agree entirely with Hennie that James was extremely unfortunate, and you have to miss out on a World Cup is nothing short of, you know, I mean, incredibly disappointing would be an understatement. I mean, it's quite tragic that he would, you know, in a game against a Minnows, a game that was already won, where he actually did very little apart from come in and, you know, he could argue that he was coming in to protect his player after the Scott Stewart had come, you know, charging in as the third player. I mean, the Scott Stewart probably what should have happened in retrospect was that Scott Stewart should have got the red card, and they should have left it to the sanction afterwards. They should have studied it all on video. But once the fracas had started, then you might as well, give, you know, 6 red cards to each team, because everybody who then gets involved, and that's why the ruling was made that the instigator. So in other words, the ruling says that 2 people in a physical sport, the likelihood that 2 people are going to get involved in an argy-bargy is very good. So what sparks it off? The third person, hence we penalize the third person, and that's what should have happened. Scott Stewart should have got the red card, and if, you know, once you'd had a look at this on video and people had calmed down and put everything in perspective, put the tournament into perspective, perhaps they would have taken a different view on James and Peter.
Yeah, and I think, I'd agree with that, Christian. And I think part of it too is you've rightly indicated, you got to take the tournament into consideration. When sides have their back against the wall, there's nothing really left to play. And you found it often in the EP sides, club rugby, there's nothing left to play for. So let's just have a bit of a punch or two and show that we're up to you physically, And I think when that happens, the game also needs to be adjudicated slightly differently, because there was no initial intent, and obviously if a side has got one or two stars and they get drawn into this and those stars get red carded, it has a massive impact for the side, if there are another 2-3 games to go in the tournament.
Hennie, just after the World Cup, I mean, there was huge ramifications for the Boks. I remember that some of your guys, I don't know if you were among them, disappeared to Fish River Sun, if I remember correctly. For the first time, there was a little bit, from what we heard, there was a little bit of a sort of thing between Francois and Kitch, where Kitch was concerned about Francois's motivation still. He thought that maybe it was such a big blow to the Bok morale that maybe it could derail your World Cup. Tell us a little bit about that time and what I've just mentioned about the trip to, I think it was to Fish River Sun. I can't imagine there's no other casinos around there. How close was it to actually derailing your World Cup campaign? The aftermath of that Canadian game.
Yeah, you're right. We did end up going to the Fish River Sun and spent a day or two there. I think there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion, and I think a lot of frustration, because what subsequently came out of that was exactly what we touched on earlier. There was a sense in the side that a lot of what happened on the field was provocation, and if one had to go and analyze the video in detail, there were a couple of incidents that raised their heads, which kind of, you were almost forced to retaliate in some form or another. And I think the fact that James, got given the red card without really being involved in a incident that would justify it, was really kind of demoralizing for the team in some way, because we were a physical team, we were a strong team, we dominated the way we did, but that was within the rules and the confines of the game. Well, in most instances. So the reality was, here we are trying to play to our strengths, and losing players for it, which was unjustified in our view. And there was a lot of discussion and a lot of, uncertainty and frustration, as I said, because that uncertainty kind of said, well, where to now? If we have to be careful about everything we do, then, I mean, you just limit your natural ability to come out with a flair and play. So there was an element of I won't call it quite a derailment as such, but there was a lot of uncertainty and frustration amongst the players, and even within admin circles, and players questioning administrators for not standing up for the players more and participating in that role. Fortunately for myself, and I don't know, I was told only later that the video clip where I got drawn into it was only shown after the cutoff period, because I believe there was a cutoff period of 48 hours to submit the evidence. And I had the good Lord looking down on me, I suppose. But that only surfaced on the Tuesday, Wednesday, so they couldn't go back and reopen that. So I had probably an easy bypass where James, had to suffer some of the consequence.
Christian, maybe you come in just with what was a couple of days after that. You guys feel almost there was the feeling in the camp that it was almost you guys had done what you'd set out to do, even though you'd lost the game.
Brendan, yeah, difficult because a World Cup ends quite abruptly. You're out the tournament and everybody gets on a plane. And I went back to Cape Town, and the Canadians, most of them went back to Canada, and then some of them were living in other parts of the world already at that stage, playing rugby. So I would have literally spent that night with them. And I was left to face the music here, and everywhere I went, and I'd still get chirped about it. So I wasn't part of. I wasn't part of. I don't think for 1 minute the Canadians were proud of what had happened that night. I certainly don't think that, and I think that as time has gone by, I think that I can't speak on behalf of them, but I mean I would imagine that there would have been a bit of remorse about what transpired, and people have got to take responsibility. I mean, I still today when I bump into James, I've never seen Peter again, but I mean, I still feel bad that he was, sent off and I was involved in the game and he missed out on playing in a World Cup final. Of course, the upside of all of this, if there is any upside, was that Chester Williams came back into the squad and what that meant for South Africa.
Yeah, no, definitely. Hennie, I was going to ask you, just when you guys had to say farewell to James and Peter, how did that go? I mean, was there an official farewell, or did they just leave the hotel without everybody knowing? Or
yeah, look, I mean, there was an announcement to say that that they'd kind of been banned out of the rest of the tournament as a result of the footage and discussions and the adjudication which took place. I think there was to some degree, on both sides, them leaving and us being kind of left to carry on, there was a certain level of disenchantment and unhappiness about how everything unfolded at that time. But your focus needs to shift quickly. You've got limited time, and as sad as what it is to see them go, we had to get our focus back on the next game, and that's what the administration and the coaches and the management try to.
When you say that you said earlier that there was like a bit of resentment at officials. I remember I interviewed James at some point, James Dalton, for a book I did, and he told me that he felt that he wasn't defended enough and that Mornay, because we all know Mornay's a great statesman, and Mornay's whole thing was like, let rugby be the winner. And I think James was offered a lawyer by Louis Late, and it was refused in the end because we're rugby people and we'll fight this on a rugby basis, which I can imagine in those days might still have been like the spirit that people took on board. But of course, rugby was about to change and become professional. And these days you look back and you think, jeepers, the guy never had a lawyer there. That just seems ridiculous. I mean, was that sort of like, incredulity sort of shared by the players that like maybe there should have been more of a defence made, and certainly in James's case?
Yeah, well, you mentioned about professionality and so forth, and I do think there was an element from James that he was kind of left out high and dry, and that things could have been handled, differently and more of a defense put up. And I think in the modern day, in the modern era, that would be a very justifiable position. but the sentiment that you've highlighted was one that at the time, seemed to be part of the amateur game, and it was what management decided to follow. Sadly for James, it didn't have the desired effect. Hoping that someone will be retained because of rugby, I think would have been, fair, and we've discussed it now at length, but that would have been the right thing to keep him as part of the team and find some other form of sanction, but that wasn't the case, and I think that's what left James very disenchanted with the situation and how it unfolded.
Well, I think we've probably wrapped it up. I don't think we can say too much more about the game, Gav. I don't know if you've got any final thoughts.
I think we've done it
to death. I just thought maybe we can start with Christian, just where you are now, and when you look back at that game, thinking it's 25 years. Just your thoughts that it's been a quarter of a century already, and what you're doing now with your life.
Yeah, I just my mom lives with me, and I just said to my mom, geez, can you believe it's 25 years since that night. So I'm still living in Cape Town, and I never lived in Canada. People sometimes think I actually lived in Canada. I was born in Canada. I think we came back here too. My mom's Canadian, so I've lived in South Africa all my life. But in '91, I did go and live in Vancouver for a year, which is a great city. And so I came back to Cape Town. I've lived in Canada. Lived in Cape Town since then. I did a year in rugby league, Sydney. That was interesting. I think Hennie also got offered. I think everybody got offered. And the World Cup Springboks all obviously stayed. And those guys who were on the periphery, a lot of them like Tiaan Strauss and Heinrich Fulson, Peter Miller, we all went over and played a season of rugby league. Andy Marinos, Andrew Aitken. Anyway, so moving on, I'm waffling. So I've been in the property business in various different roles, and currently I'm just finished off with a residential development, and I'm involved in commercial industrial property.
Okay. And Hennie, you down in the Eastern Cape there, you on the game farm there. Tell us a bit more what you're doing at the moment.
Brendan, I'm really most of the time up in Johannesburg, involved in a number of ventures. The one is just an online auctioning company looking at assets from, mining and industrial assets. We kind of move those for large corporates, as well as, just being, applying solutions in terms of cost saving, like there's unique lighting savings for big warehouses, saving them between 30 and 90% of their lighting bills. So there are a lot of those types of options. So Christian, maybe you and I can have a chat after this. But other than that, I got the little game farm down here between Grahamstown and Kenton on Sea, and just love nature, love being in it, and spending time down here. It's just a lot more relaxing than Joburg, so I need to get down here every now and then.
I can believe that. Now, listen, guys, thanks for the chat. I mean, it's been great reminiscing. I promise you we won't be phoning you in 25 years' time in the future. I don't think we'll all be around by then, but hopefully. But there'll be something else taking up our time by that stage. But thanks for the chat. I really enjoyed it, and it was really great catching up with you guys. Gav?
I just wanted to say that, like, if you could have both of you guys again at some point, possibly in daylight hours as well, doing just to look back at your careers. We've done it with a few guys. Mark Andrews was with us for quite a while, and it's actually quite interesting just to go back into your careers and look at that. So at some stage, if you guys are willing, like in the future, we'll revisit it. And as I say, this is the first time we've done this thing under lights, as it were. So it's like maybe it will be better to either get this fixed up or otherwise do it in the daylight.
I look better in the dark, so I'm happy at night.